All right, so I want to talk about how you can start a photography side hustle for just around $1,000. If you're a photographer or just starting out, just because you love photography doesn't mean you can't make some money with it. So after doing this for a few years, I have some tips that I would have liked to give myself, and I'm going to go ahead and share them with you guys now. So we're going to break this video up into two segments. We're going to do what gear I would get, trying to keep my budget under $1,000 or around $1,000. And then other tips like what you should learn about photography first, steps to growing your portfolio and booking your first gig, as well as the various revenue streams that the beginner photographer side hustle business can take on even if you're just first starting off. Okay, so this first part of the video is geared to those people that don't have a camera set up yet. So after doing some research and keeping in mind that we're trying to stay close to $1,000, we're trying to get a camera system that has a lot of versatility so it doesn't limit your options when you're trying to get a paid gig. That being said, I'm recommending the Sony a6400 as your first camera. Now these new are still around $1,000, but I went ahead and checked eBay listings today and you can find used body only for around $600, which is great for this camera. It's quite a few years newer than its counterpart, the a6300, which is gonna help you grow as a photographer because it has a lot more autofocus points, will result in you missing less shots, which is extremely important, especially when you're doing like an event. Now this is the Sigma 2470 lens. We're not gonna use that. And for the lens that's gonna keep you under $1,000, I'm gonna go ahead and recommend the 18105 Sony G series lens with an aperture of f4. Use this lens on eBay is between $350 and $400, keeping you right around that $1,000 budget, which is great. And honestly, from what I've seen online, this lens is perfect at getting most jobs done. 18mm is plenty wide to do most real estate photography gigs. Then you have the option of doing very popular focal lengths like 50mm and 85mm when you're shooting like portraits or couples photography, doing micro sessions or something like that. Just giving you a wide array of options when you're trying to start your first photography side hustle. Now the other two things you will crucially need is an SD card. I wouldn't get anything less than a V30 SD card. You can find them for around $10 on Amazon. And this is only true if you want to dabble in real estate photography, but you're gonna need a tripod. It doesn't have to be crazy for real estate photography when you're first starting off. The Amazon basic tripod is around $20, and that will more than hold you over while you grow your real estate photography portfolio, and you can upgrade at a later date. So that's the gears. So let's go ahead and talk about a few tips that I would have when you're first starting out photography, keeping in mind the hopes of eventually making some side hustle money from it. So with photography, your portfolio is everything. You're doing real estate photography, you need a real estate portfolio. You're doing portrait photography, you need a portrait portfolio. You're doing couples, families, etc. You need a portfolio that targets the market you want to dive into and the one that you're interested in. Someone's not going to look at a real estate portfolio and be like, oh, maybe they can do my portraits. And vice versa, someone's not going to look at your portrait photography and be like, oh, maybe they can do real estate. Sure, you might get some gigs here and there, but you really want to target your portfolio to one niche starting off. You can grow it to other things as you grow and want to do more things. So that's tip one, working on your portfolio, growing your portfolio. But how do you do that if you don't have clients? Well, what I did when I first started off is I just offered friends and family to do portraits for them. I did a couples portrait session with two of my friends and they came out okay for my first time. You can find a friend that might be selling their house and be like, hey, I see you're selling your house and your photos look okay. Do you mind if I come over and take a few photos? And you can use those photos as long as I can use them for my portfolio. And after you have some experience with your portfolio and start building it out, you can start working towards figuring out how you're going to get gigs to get paid. Now, building your portfolio is extremely important, and that's going to be true for a novice photographer or just someone starting off. But if you're someone starting off, a more important tip than building your portfolio is just taking your camera everywhere you go. Take photos of different things. Offer to take photos of your friends and family. Take note of composition and things like the rule of thirds, how like there's three lines intersecting, and in these intersecting points, it kind of creates a more dynamic and interesting picture. Notice how different compositions tells completely different stories, whether you want a completely blurred out background or you want something more in focus and you're using an aperture of like f5.6, f9, so you can bring your viewer into the environment that the subject's in. You have to consider doing things like watching a bunch of YouTube videos, learning about composition, learning about manual photography settings. I have a bunch of videos on my channel that goes over the manual settings and the benefits of using manual, how ISO affects your picture, how aperture affects your picture. How long should your exposure settings be when you're shooting like an event? Can that exposure setting be lower when you're shooting like portrait photography? How does focal length impact what your exposure setting should be? Those are all extremely important questions that you need to ask yourself when you're first starting out photography. And once you have your camera basics down, your portfolio built out, that's when we can start, looking into making some money. Now from experience, getting your first gig might be a little bit daunting of a task when you're first starting out. But I find making a decent website with a decent portfolio, making a Facebook page that links people to that website, and advertising on Facebook for your respective gigs is a great place to start out. I got lucky. That's how I started off, just by, trial and error, and my first attempt was great. I ran an ad campaign and immediately started landing some gigs. And so outside of word of mouth, Facebook advertising is a tool that I would definitely utilize when trying to get your first gig. And lastly, here's a few different revenue streams with photography. First, real estate photography. That's self-explanatory, taking photos of rooms. You're gonna need a tripod, use long exposure settings, make sure the room's nice and bright, everything's visible. Shooting wide's always great. In order to get into this, I would figure out what local realtors are there. Say, hey, I'm a real estate photographer, or I'm looking to get into real estate photography. And you can do one of two things, either offer a very cheap price or do a few for free. And then reach out to more real estate photographers saying, hey, this is my portfolio, this is my rate. Are you interested in working something out where maybe I could do a few houses for you in the future? Secondly, you got self-portraits. You can get started in like high school sports photos, senior pictures, that kind of stuff is going to be a very good entry point for getting into portrait photography. For that, I would rely on community pages. Like, for example, I have a local community page that is for my town, and I constantly see people saying, hey, I'm a photographer looking for gigs, or hey, my daughter needs senior photos done, etc. Like that kind of stuff. Just using Facebook, local community pages is going to be great for that. And then when you're talking about couples portraits or micro sessions and stuff like that, Facebook advertising, again, it's going to be a great tool for that. You can target people that are recently engaged and focus on like engagement shoots, which is going to be a great bridge if you ever want to get into something like wedding photography. Now, I would recommend at least a few years under your belt before getting into wedding photography, but doing couples portraits, families portraits, micro sessions will be a good starting point while you learn this lucrative field. And then after that, reach out to some other local wedding photographers, hit them up, be like, hey, if you ever need a second shooter, here's my portfolio. I'm interested in learning wedding photography. What's your rate? Maybe we can work something out so I can second shoot a wedding for you. Anyways, guys, I hope this video and these tips helped you out. Please consider that like button down below and subscribe to my channel. I do have videos related to this type of content, helping translate how a camera can help make you decent side hustle money. I try to come out with a long form video every week, so if you guys stick around, I'll catch you in the next video.